Hey guys, welcome to another video and thanks for clicking on this one. It's been a minute. I didn't release any videos last week, and this week also I have every reason not to. As you can see, my high, this one is quite red. I honestly can't tell you what's going on, but everything is good. I feel good. I've been busy as well with work, so maybe that's probably why my eyes are red, because my sleep is a little bit off. But here's something that I want to share with you in this video, and I hope that for those of you who may be preparing for your final stage interview with Speedbird Pilot Program, I think one of the things that you should understand is this is where all your effort can really come to life. Like all the time you've been putting in studying, practicing, all the time that you've done maybe your previous assessment and didn't get through, all those things are going to be tested again at this stage. And when I say tested again, I'm talking about your ability to go through, the stress that you would experience on that day, your ability to put your best effort and best self out there will be, tested on that day. And I want you to have a thorough understanding that, hey, they've sent you your guide, you have the guide to go by. However, you still need to do your own work. So without wasting time, one of the things I'll say is that congratulations to you to have gotten to this stage. It's a huge milestone. Thousands of people start this process and now you're down to a few hundreds. And that just says a lot about the program, but also says a lot about how much you have put in to get here. Now, for those who may not have gotten to this stage or didn't get through to this final stage, I want to tell you something. The truth remains that sometimes you may have been cut off due to one or two things, maybe during your interview with the flight school. And I always say that spend time to get yourself prepared for the next one. It may not be Speedbird the next time around. It may be a different airline. But you want to take the lessons learned and apply them so that you can come out stronger next time around. So let's get into this video. Now, in this particular video, I want to talk about some of the what we'll call observable behaviors, and particularly the competencies that you can definitely be expected to be tested on. And this is not in any order. This is just something that I've made on a Word sheet document, and I just want to highlight some things with you. If you haven't seen the pilot competency guide that I have, or if you haven't seen any competency guide out there and you're at this stage, then I would encourage you to spend time to look for that information. It's online. I have some links below as well. You can check them out. They would help. So let's get into the first one here. All right. The first one that you definitely be tested on this day will be your communication. Okay. One of the key things about communication is that in aviation, it's one of the most important aspects of doing your job, and your ability to communicate and share your ideas and be able to defend your ideas with sound judgment goes a long way. Now, without getting into the aspect of leadership or getting the aspect of decision making, I want you to think about your communication as how you even express yourself. The truth is, if you are honest about what you're saying, it shows through. If you are dishonest about what you're saying, it shows through. And when you go into this interview, if you're saying something that you don't really mean, they sense it, they see it, they can feel it. And when I say they can feel it, it's just about they do this on a regular basis. They have experience interviewing people on a regular basis. They've probably done this a few times already with different people, and they've been trained to look for signs on how you are delivering your information, maybe with confidence, or you have doubts about what you're saying. They sense those things. So as you practice, as you go over your various interview questions you may have seen out there, one of the things I would say is that make sure that you are genuinely communicating what you mean, and especially if it's something that is personal. So for example, you may have questions that are testing your own skills, like how you have dealt with problems in the past. The way you narrate that situation and how convincing you are about the steps you took and how you dealt with it can show through. This is best done practically, like when I'm sure you've interacted with people where you have a sense that they are probably not being honest about what they're saying. This is something that you want to avoid. Whatever you say, let it be something that you actually mean. Now, one of the observable behaviors says determines the recipient is ready and able to receive information. All of this sounds, some of them are basic. But here's something that I want you to pay attention to. You see where it says select appropriately what, when, how, and with whom to communicate? That aspect is missing something that I also want to add to you. Why? You see, there's always the 5 rules of communication, which will be what, when, how, why, and to whom. Okay, those 5 aspects, this one has 4 of them, but the why, about why you want the person to understand what you're saying, is key. Now, whether it's during your speedy interview or speedy session or speedy interview, or during your reflective interview, or maybe during your individual activity, you always want to let the other person who might be present understand why you are doing something or why you believe something needs to be done. So I want to just highlight that to you. The other thing I want you to pay attention to, all right? You see, this aspect here, depending on the situation, it says uses appropriate escalation in communication to resolve identified deviations. This is something related to, for those of you who may not be familiar with maybe the PACE acronym. PACE acronym is generally used is almost like a guideline or framework, of thought process to follow if you are finding yourself in a situation where you have to speak up about something. And PACE, P-A-C-E, all right? The P stands for you probing, okay? So probing to identify or gather information about what an action somebody has done or what somebody's doing. The A is, of course, calling the attention to it. The C is challenging the person in terms of pointing them in the right direction. There's more about this. You can read about this online. It's freely available, but I'm not going to deal into that because I feel like it's going to deviate from what I want to talk about. But the E is obviously taking evasive action. But what I'm trying to get you to understand is when you escalate situations, all right, or a conflict type problem that you have and you have to go through a series of steps, you have to use the appropriate step for what is needed. For example, if you were given a scenario where on an approach to a runway and maybe at minimums you realize that the pilot isn't going around or the pilot flying isn't going around, what do you do? Well, we don't have all the time to go through 10 steps, if that makes sense, because we are at a critical phase of flight in which time is limited and action needs to be taken to prevent disaster. On the other hand, if you are given a scenario in which maybe you had cruise level, the other pilot is on, or you're pilot monitoring and you need to make a decision about something, then you may have time to go through a series of steps to figure out what the best course of action is. Okay, so the point I'm trying to point to you now is, as you think about your scenario, there's always an appropriate time, an appropriate place, an appropriate action to take or to be taken in order to handle that situation. There are situations in which it requires you to take immediate actions to prevent further deterioration of the circumstance that you're in and maybe jeopardize safety. And there, of course, there are times in which you may have more time to handle such problems because there's less imminent danger, if that makes sense. Now, of course, the next thing I want to also point out to you, all right, which is not mentioned here, is in relation to conflict, okay? You may be asked questions in relation to conflict. And of course, this also comes up, this one here, all right, ask relevant questions and effective questions. This doesn't specifically address conflict, all right, any of these options here, but in communication, one of the things that leads to conflict is misunderstanding of the action that was taken due to lack of communicating what is intended. And what I'm trying to say is that if you don't communicate your intentions to the other party or to the other person, to your co-pilot, your first officer, there's possibility that there could be misunderstanding that ensues, or just the fact that the person doesn't see what you are doing. And when I say see, it doesn't understand or doesn't have an understanding of what is going on. And sometimes you resolve this by, of course, sharing ahead of time. Hey, this is what I plan to do. When you share that plan through your briefings, through the materials that you have, the SOPs, all this stuff, when you share it based on concrete information, then it makes it clear to the person. And when conflict arises, how do you then handle it? Then we then have to follow the series of steps. One of the steps you want to take is, hey, for that conflict, do we actually have the time to talk about it at this place? If you're in a critical phase of flight, that conflict may not be the time to resolve that conflict, although an action may need to be taken. And that action may be, oh, you know what? If the step I've taken isn't going to jeopardize safety, then at the appropriate time and place, we can talk about it. Now, of course, it's an action that jeopardizes safety. Then we don't have all the time because we need to make sure we are back into the safe zone. And there's a graph which I didn't prepare for this video that I'm doing right now. But think about safety as being on a spectrum, okay, where there's an unsafe side and there's safe side, okay? The goal is that for every situation that occurs in flight or on the ground, you want to make sure that you are in the safe zone. And actions that deter you from being in that safe zone put you in the unsafe zone. And maybe while I'm editing this video, I may put it up there. But one thing I want you to understand is that you always want to be in that safe zone. And even in a conflict scenario, if safety isn't jeopardized, sometimes it may not be the appropriate time and place to handle or deal with that conflict. Okay, so you're at minimums and your captain is landing at this time, and maybe something comes up. The captain decides, you know what, it is best to proceed because, hey, it's not jeopardizing safety. However, you may not have understood the reasoning behind the action. Well, that's not the time to start asking the captain, like, hey, why are you doing this, right? Because you're at a critical phase of flight. You are going to create more distractions than actually resolve the problem, which could also lead to jeopardize safety at that point. So the point here is that you always have to have that judgment, that people or the awareness, okay, of when to handle certain situations, especially when it relates to conflict. The next one I want to share with you is situational awareness. All right, this is something that is tested in any interview. You have to understand that when it comes to situational awareness, the understanding of what has happened, what is happening, what will happen, right, needs to be maintained at all times. And if you look at it from those three areas that I've just mentioned to you, it really helps you to, one, keep an understanding of what is going on around you, and two, it helps you to deal with situations when they come up because you've probably planned for it. You already know what is likely to happen, what are the potential options that are available to us, and what are the actions we can take to resolve them if they come up. So here it says monitors and assesses the state of the airplane. Of course, that is always important, especially for scenarios that are, in this case, flight related. Monitor and assesses the airplane's energy. Same thing as well. Monitors the environment, validates the accuracy of information for gross errors and checks for gross errors. Maintains awareness of people involved and affected by the operation. This is the one I want you to pay attention to. Okay, because when it comes to any flight scenario, okay, there are always people involved, and sometimes what I've seen is that a lot of people, because you are probably as a cadet and somebody who may not have a lot of experience, it is very easy to become so focused on just the aspect of the flight scenario that you forget about the passengers that are involved, your crew members that are behind, or your cabin crew members. You forget about the other pilot that is present. Maybe you forget about the people on the ground. Those are people that you need to consider in that scenario, or other pilots or ATC. Your resources, in as much as they are resources, in the sense they give you information, you need to also give them information when necessary, and of course when the time is adequate. So for whatever scenario you're given, when it comes to flight related situations, think about these people. How does it affect these people? They want to see, or any interviewer wants to see, that you can think outside of just what the problem is and consider how it impacts the operation, the people. And of course, remember, every airline, the first thing is are we safe? Safe operation is always number one. Then two, whatever decisions we make, how does it affect us in terms of the people, the plane, right? The people on board and all that, and others are outside as well. And of course, the next thing is, how does it affect the passengers in terms of, okay, if I'm going to make a decision, where do I need to be? And if this decision is going to be appropriate for the type of people I'm flying, or for the people I'm flying. Okay, remember, we've already gone through the first thing, which is safety. Okay, so you have to always make safe decisions. But in terms of if you're going to divert, for example, a diversion scenario where you're going to divert to an airport that has no maybe customs, and you have international passengers on board, or you're flying to a place where, you know, there's just maybe tension going on, right? We have a lot of tension going on in the world right now, and you want to divert to a place. You have to consider, okay, the people on board, are these people actually going to be safe in the area that I'm going to? Okay, and then of course you then have to think about the operation as last. How does it affect the operation of the airline? Okay, that's always the last thing, but it has to be considered. It's something to consider. Again, this is best handled during a scenario, but something to think about. Another important part that I want you to consider, all right, contingency plans based on potential risk associated with threats and errors. This is where a lot of people also come short. When you're thinking about potential risk and errors in an operation, okay, potential risks needs to be identified. If you're making a decision about something, what are the risks? What's the reward, right? Now, more about the risk and how do we mitigate those risks? Okay, the goal isn't just to solve the problem, because everything that you solve creates another. For example, if you're going to divert to a place, okay, there are some risks that probably may be present. Is it maybe it's a longer flight? Is it that you are now cutting close to your fuel? Is it that maybe there's some weather to deal with and or turbulence to deal with? Whatever that scenario may be, you have to identify the risks and then find ways to mitigate them. Okay. Now, in mitigating, the question now comes to mind. How many potential, I'm sorry, I should have showed that, okay. How many potential options should you come up with? This is where, you know, it's subjective, okay, because for one scenario, somebody may come up with 3 contingency plans, some other person may come up with 5. But one thing that is important to remember is that it's not really about how many contingencies you come up with. It's the quality of the contingencies and the plans you have in place. Does that make sense? It's not about how many contingency plans you can come up with, because we can always come up with unlimited amount of outcomes for a decision, right? But are they pertinent to the situation? Okay, are they pertinent to the situation you're given? You have to make sure that your contingency plans are highly pertinent to that situation, so are relevant to it. If I'm coming up with contingency plans about a scenario that has to do with maybe fuel, right? Then I'm thinking about, okay, how does my fuel impact the operation? I don't want to run out of fuel. I want to make sure I have enough for that operation. But at the same time, okay, maybe my weight needs to be considered for that. Okay, how does that weight affect my takeoff and landing? How does it affect my cruise flight? Do I burn more fuel? Do I burn less fuel based on this? And do I need to take on more fuel? And of course, we can then talk about maybe sustainability impact as well. How does this impact these sustainability goals that we're trying to hit or meet? If every pilot flies like this, carrying every tons of fuel, well, maybe the airline will meet its goals. Okay, but that's just an example of what I mean. The point here is, you know, you need to come up with appropriate contingency plans or rationale that applies to the situation you have going on. Now, the next thing that I want you to pay attention to will be your problem and decision making. Okay, this is where problem solving and decision making. This is where the acronym TDOTA kind of comes in to play. All right, TDOTA. You know, you have the time being a big one. Okay, you never want to run out of time in any situation. Okay. The next one is where you need to come up with, maybe make decisions or diagnose the problem rather. Your diagnosis has to be applicable to the situation, and sometimes it's always evident in the scenario. Then, of course, you then go with the the O, which is coming up with options, probable or possible options that you would want. And this is where your options needs to be relevant to solving the problem, of course. And then, of course, pick the most appropriate one, act on it after you make the decision. Then the aspect that I want you to remember that you always want to do is the review. All right. The review is where a lot of people, because of time pressure, you tend to skip this aspect. And your review is so important because that is how you can see, that is where you reassess the situation and make a quick summary of what has happened. This is what happened. These are the options we had. We made a decision, and here's where we are right now. Based on this, are we headed in the right direction? Are we getting the desired results? If not, we can go back and change the option and make a different decision. But we need to review that and make sure that everybody's involved in this, okay, in that decision making. If it's a team, which is going to likely be a team decision, you want to make sure that everybody's involved in it. And when I say team decision, I'm talking about even in a scenario where it's just you being tested, you want to make sure that your team members, quote unquote, in this case, your cabin crew, your other pilot, your ground crew, they're all involved in that. And of course, you execute on that decision. Now, when it comes to the aspect of workload management, this is also an important area. Okay. A lot of times people fail to delegate tasks. So don't fail to delegate tasks when needed. Seek assistance or accept assistance when appropriate. That's also important. There's another one I want to say: plan, prioritizes, and schedules appropriate tasks effectively. Those are all important things to do. I don't have much to say about workload management. So it's just about realizing, hey, when there's ample time to deal with certain situations, let's deal with them now, okay? Because you have ample time. By dealing with those problems now, you are creating yourself the room to handle more in the future, if that makes sense. So every phase of flight has different workload demands. And if you're at cruise, for example, it means that, hey, you can brief the arrival, brief the approach, and kind of reduce the amount of work that you'd have to do when you are in a fast-paced environment. Same thing that applies to the scenario you're given. If it's going to, or a question you're asked, pick the appropriate task to be done based on the workload demand. And of course, if you have to delegate as necessary. Leadership and teamwork, this is always important. Aviation is one of the key areas where, teamwork is key, and you don't have the room to work alone. You always have to share knowledge and ideas, information, all that. Without making this video too long, those are the three areas that I really want to touch on. So we've touched on the situational awareness, we touched on communication, we touched on leadership and teamwork, and actually for workload management. Those four areas are very crucial. Make sure you are vast in the knowledge and how to demonstrate those on your interview. I just want to wish you success, and I'll see you in a future video.